interesting about economic history generally and the history of capitalism is that it's kind of incomplete, or it's, I don't know, one-sided even. And if I give an example of what I mean, maybe the most critical thing, or the most crucial, the essential thing about capital, or the evolution of what I call capital economy, dating, let's say, from the Renaissance, is the appearance of double-entry bookkeeping, the technique on which the whole modern economy completely depends. Well, double-entry bookkeeping it's not a device, it's the equivalent in accounting of perspective in art. It shows at a certain point in the history of art, you can see, at least in Western European art, you can see up until a certain point there was no perspective. After that point there's perspective. The only thing that's changed is the consciousness of human beings must have changed, otherwise where would this new development come from? And double-entry bookkeeping is identical with perspective. It just shows there was a change of consciousness at the time of the Renaissance. If you learn double-entry bookkeeping, in order to learn it, to understand it, you have to achieve this consciousness of which it's the expression. So this is a very powerful thing. If you were to teach double-entry bookkeeping to people, they could never have a capitalist-socialist divide in their mind. It would never arise. We can go a long way with government regulation and government interference and government doing this and that with economic life. We'll probably go on for a long time. For me, it's not interesting because it's so predictable, and in a way it's so boring. And you know, if you really wanted, from my point of view, if you wanted to regulate the economy in a very effective way, you would do what I call, you would bring about inherent regulation, so from within and not from without. And I don't mean you know, disciplined markets or something like this. I mean, you would use your set of accounts, your balance sheet in particular, to make sure that what is in your accounts is what's out there. And an example would be, why is something off balance sheet? It's because you don't know the exposure. Well, then have an item on the balance sheet which says exposure unknown. This will soon affect my investment in your business. How would finance actually be regulated in its own terms? And it's going to have to come up with something of this technical quality, which is what I call inherent. You know, basically, if you tell a lie, if you say your assets are worth more than they are, you have a problem in your balance sheet. Well, one of the things that's interesting with the global financial crisis is people start saying, there's something wrong with the global bit of it, so let's go local. When you come into a global economy, one has to be careful when you say global or local. Are we talking about physical geography? Because if the money, which today is the case, is virtual, it's electronic, it's in laptop computers, in accounting, you know, computer accounting packages, it's blips on a screen, who knows where it is. The last place it is in form of cash in someone's pocket. Then where is local? You know, where's local on the internet? It's nowhere. And I think the best way to understand that is you cannot go local in a modern economy. You can individualize it. You can make yourself the locality. So you can become conscious of what you do. So in that sense, when you arrive in a global economy, the only local thing to talk about is the individual and his decisions. Technically, you cannot have a local bank, you cannot have local finance in a global economy, but you can make it local. You can put in your database, please identify all customers within 5 miles of this building. And then you can say, hand on heart, this is a local bank. But you have to kind of put the filter in, if you see what I'm saying. It's not there to be seen otherwise. When you have a global financial system, the only way you can localize it is through your consciousness. And that will be a function of what you think you're thinking about. So local sounds great. For HSBC, local is worldwide. For someone else, it could be, you know, the corner bank in my little village. Local means nothing. If I individualize my decisions, local means a lot. And I would even say it's the only thing it can mean in a global financial economy. Otherwise, the consciousness, where is the consciousness of a global financial economy? It's nowhere. For me, it's the one to watch, and you can make it's also kind of quietly waiting. The more one understands what I'm describing by doing it, I'm afraid, you will then catch up with history. You will then see, so first of all, history hasn't quite been the way I think it's been. It's lacking an ingredient. And secondly, you will now find you're in a landscape quite different to the one you thought you were in. And all that's happened is you've understood double entry bookkeeping. I say all that's happened. And this may sound a bit strange, especially if one hasn't done double entry bookkeeping. But if you do double entry bookkeeping, you'll come up with a kind of vengeance inside the technique on which capital economy depends. And this technique, if I put in a certain image, means you have to be aware of your motives in doing something and of the effects you have on those around you. This sounds like corporate social responsibility, but corporate social responsibility is a bolt-on, as far as I'm concerned. It's trying to realize late in the day, I need to take care of some issues. If you do double entry bookkeeping, you will be corporately socially responsible by definition, because it requires you to have a sense of where your actions come from and what effect is they're having. And I would say a lot of the problems we have in modern economic life that people rail against or they want to change are, they sort of wouldn't be there if we were conscious of our motives. And the other side of that is you then take care of your effect. From my point of view, the economic life and finance generally should have nothing to do with politics. So if I give two very simple examples, if I ask myself, where does money come from? Money comes from you wanting to buy something from me. So if you need your hair cut and I'm able to cut your hair, I will cut your hair, you will give me some money. So in my terms, when you need a service rendered to you, you will issue money. That means money doesn't get issued by any banking system. It gets issued by human beings when they need things. Similarly, if you have an idea you want to carry out, you want to start a business, presume you have an initiative, the competence to carry out some idea, something you're going to bring about, if only you can be capitalized. So when you get lent the money, it may appear to come from a bank, but any banker will tell you, I'm only lending against your wonderful idea. So the origin of credit is your initiative, your idea. Well, if you accept that money issue is created by people needing things, things to eat, goods, and credit creation is a function of people having ideas, initiative, there is no banking system in that monetary concept. And if there's no banking system, there's nothing for politicians to be involved in. One of the things I think is interesting about modern finance is people are beginning to look for alternatives, what they call alternatives. My question is always, alternative to what? So if you look at alternative currency systems, technically, a lot of them, LETS systems, for example, local exchange trading systems, are largely accounting systems. They often use banking software, the software used by the very banks which they think they're being an alternative to. You have people who create alternative pounds in England, in the Lewis pound or the Canterbury pound, alternative to the pound sterling. If they're an alternative, it's because they're not fiat currencies. They're not issued by a government. They're issued because people in that system want to use a local currency, but then that's because if they want their hair cut, they want someone locally to buy their haircut and they would use a local pound. That pound would be issued by the person who is having his hair cut. It's not issued by the Central Bank of England. It's not issued by the Central Bank of Canterbury. It doesn't exist. It's issued by the other person in the Canterbury economic system. So that's an alternative to fiat currency. But I would turn that around because a fiat currency is an alternative to what I just described. And what I just described existed before central banks. So before you had central banks and state banks and so on, you had people buying and selling things using money as a means of exchange. And that you could still do today. So my response to the global financial crisis is very simple. It's not a financial crisis. It's a crisis of epistemology. It's a crisis of how we understand finance. And this we could overcome fairly easily by understanding finance much more clearly. It's a crisis of ontology, of the way we behave. And so for me, if I was kind of going to say, well, if I ruled the world, what would I do? I would require every teenager to be taught financial literacy in a true fashion, which would mean they'd be taught double entry bookkeeping. Technically, they'd be taught to do it. They would be given their own affairs to run. They'd have to walk their talk. And then a lot of the things I'm describing would be known to them. They would inherently regulate their own economy. They wouldn't need a central bank or any politician. They'd look at their own balance sheet and say, oops, I planned to sell 50 of those and I only sold 49 because I couldn't be bothered to get up in the morning, or whatever the reason might be, you know. And this is what your accounts will show you. They would ask you to say, why is what you said you're going to do not the same thing as what you did? Please explain and now do differently the next day. This is budgeting and forecasting. And if everybody was taught to do this, this would change everyone's understanding of finance, not just theoretically and kind of the words, but into the way they behaved. And a lot of it is about, in Shakespeare's terms, to thine own self be true, and thou canst not be false to any man. And I think this is true of the economy as well. But that would mean, to be practical, for every young person, if one's going to talk about young people who would like to achieve something or has a problem with the banking system, I would say to him, tell me what it is you want to do with your life, tell me how much capital you need, and let's write you a check. This would be a much more interesting thing, because then a young person, whatever that means, would then have to become much clearer about what they were going to bring to the table that's not already on the table, for example. But the world of finance, the people who own capital, who think they own capital and all these things, the banks, they would be put in a very difficult place if a young person said, I need $1 million to do this, and the payoff is you lend it to me and you help me achieve it. The more so if you don't charge me interest. So that, for me, that would have a huge effect on the world. To invest money in young people, let's say for 10 years or whatever, the amount which they feel they need, without interest, this sounds to me like it's pretty direct investment. It's like buying shares in someone's business, you know. This would change the conscience of the young people, but more importantly, it would change the conscience of the people who think they control the access to credit.